Hi friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Laura Ingalls Gunn. This week we're going to be looking at Victorian children's undergarments, specifically the undergarments that may have been worn by children of pioneers in the 1880s. And this is based upon research that I've been doing for a book that I am writing, and it covers the eras of the 1870s and 1880s. Now, this is a good time to remind everyone that I am not a fashion academic or a dress historian. I don't have a degree in fashion design or a doctorate in textile design. I am simply a woman who loves historical fashion and research and tries her best to recreate it. But in saying that, I imagine that the average pioneer woman trying to clothe her family under difficult circumstances at best didn't hold a degree either. So let's just push forward. Now, one thing to keep in mind about this era is that both infants and toddlers, whether they be male or female, would have been dressed exactly the same. It was a very neutral type of fashion. We didn't really get into dressing infants specifically as male or female until about the mid-20th century. And some of the reasons why this was done, why infants would have worn a long gown, and I'll put a image up here, is that was just for ease in diapering. You know, it was very easy to lift up the infant's skirt to change the diaper. And of course, once the child became mobile, then the skirts would have been shortened to accommodate for crawling or a new walker. And a boy would not really have been breeched, meaning to be put into breeches or trousers, until somewhere between the ages of 4 and 8. And actually, this was a really big celebratory moment in a young boy's life. There were often celebrations. He would go and have his hair cut for perhaps the first time and would be provided with a suit that would probably look very much like his father. And you know, if you would like to see some really wonderful images of what children would have worn in the 1860s, a wonderful website is written by Sarah at Romantic History. And there are wonderful patterns for children by Elizabeth Stewart Clark. And all of those links will be provided down below in the description box. You'll just need to hit the words "click more," and that will take you over to my website, which will give you all of the historical references. So you don't have to worry about writing things down. It will all be provided for you. Another reason that children were dressed identically for most of their early childhood is families tended to be quite large during this time period, and babies often came in quick succession. So a woman, a young mother, just wouldn't have had time to create clothing that was specifically made for male or female, because of course during that time period you would have not known what the baby was going to be until it was born. And any young parent will tell you that particularly in the early months, babies grow at a very rapid rate, and at times it feels like the little clothes aren't worn very long at all. So you would have been wanting to reuse those garments for each baby that would come. And so some of the extant gowns that I have picked up over the years are very elaborate. Oh, it's just so beautiful with the trim and the pin tucks. Now these pin tucks are often also referred to as growth tucks, and you often see it more in older children's clothes because children grow more up than they do out. So in order to lengthen a garment and extend the wear, you would just unpick these growth tucks so that the garment could be lengthened to accommodate a growing child. Now, as beautiful and fine as this is, it probably would not have been worn by a pioneer child. And the reasoning for that, number one, pioneers often had very little money, and something as heavily embellished as that, you could buy the pre-made laces to add to your garments. This is an extant example that I have that you could have just added to the bottom of a lady's petticoat or a child's long gown or sack. And other ways is, you had the petticoat flounces, but then you also had a type of insertion lace. And I'm trying to find, there's a few spots where you can see that the lace is coming apart. So you would have joined these two pieces together with very fine stitching. And this would have been another piece of lace or trim. And then again, your additional piece that would have then been attached to the bottom of your fabric. So you could go as elaborate as you wanted to. But of course, clothing and trims and ribbon was very expensive at that time, and your average pioneering family just would have not been able to afford decorative trim such as this. And so, it probably would have been a much plainer gown. This does have a ruffle on the bottom of fabric and a heavy-duty crocheted trim, but a lot of the garments for pioneering children wouldn't have even had that. And one of the reasons for that is trying to keep your clothes clean was a very harsh process during that era. You were using a lye soap, which is, a very aggressive detergent, very hot boiling water, and then your clothes were of course scrubbed on a scrub board. And that motion, that repetition, these delicate laces would not have been able to have held up as a garment that was worn every day. You would want something plain and sturdy that you could really keep clean, because any caregiver of a child will tell you it is not uncommon for children to have 2, 3, 4. I think I remember a very bad day that I had to change my daughter 6 times, due to illness in a single day. So you're going through an incredible amount of laundry, and it just needs to be hard wearing. So you're probably not going to see lace and trims on their undergarments. And some of the other pictures that I will share with you, you can kind of see that even the outer garments were free from elaborate decoration for children of parents who perhaps didn't quite make as much money. And in terms of what the fabric would have been used for the undergarments, a wonderful reference that I found was Castle's Household Guide, which was published in the 1880s, and you can read for free the entire guide on archive.org. And again, I'll give those specific links in my accompanying website post that I write. And it kind of gave me a great chuckle, because child rearing and what you need for doing that was the very last chapter of this 300 plus guide. It came after farming. It came after the care of animals, you know, and how to can your food. So that just really tickled me. And it gave very lengthy descriptions on how the sewist should set up her sewing area, and what fabric she should have, and what type of needles. And of course, you know, very often at this time, for particularly pioneers, men absolutely learned to sew, particularly if they were a bachelor. You know, that was a skill that they definitely needed to have. But specifically for children's clothes, they had a lot of opinions, you know, even on the sewing machine. During that time of the 1880s, the sewing machine was heavily used. And some individuals had strong opinions that for infants' garments, you know, the sewing machine should not be used, that the needle stitch was too rough against infant skin. And, you know, that just gave me a chuckle, because a pioneering wife, woman, or caretaker, they would have had so many duties during the day. Just meal preparation alone took several hours a day. And, you know, an entire day, generally Monday, was devoted to washing of the garments and ironing and mending. And so I think that if they did have a machine, they would have used it, because they just didn't have the luxury of time for hand sewing garments. And the Castle's Household Guide even goes over that, you know, infants' garments should only be made out of the very finest French cambric, which is a very lightweight and delicate, and yes, very soft fabric. But again, I'm thinking about the rigorous scrubbing that a pioneering man or woman would have been doing on wash day. And fine French cambric would not have held up very well. I think more a heavy-duty cotton muslin would have been used. Whether or not it was bleached or unbleached, meaning more of an off-white or white, you know, a bright white color, I think that would have been just determined again by their financial means. At that time, unbleached muslin was less expensive than bleached muslin, as a rule. You know, never say never. There's always someone who may have sold them for the same amount. But I also think about, you know, you're out on dusty prairies or wagon trails and the amount of dust. And I would think that perhaps unbleached muslin, which is, you know, a darker ivory or bisque in color, may have been preferred, because it wouldn't have shown the dust like the pure white that would have maybe been used for someone living in the city who was more well off or had greater financial means. And so, you know, in thinking about patterns of that era, you do have photography showing what children wore, but not so much their undergarments. This particular photograph is a rarity, and I only found it after several days of research. You just would not have been photographed professionally in a photographer's studio in your undergarments. So you see children, primarily dressed in what probably would have been their very best clothes. Now, I love this little portrait of this darling girl shown with her mother, showing patriotic spirit. And you kind of notice, you can kind of see that there's layers. So the reasoning for you may have had drawers or pantaloons to cover the legs, but underneath that would have been the diaper, also sometimes referred to as the nappy, and that would have been covered with a pilch or soaker, and a somewhat modern day equivalent is the rubber pants or the diaper wrap, if you're familiar with cloth diapering. And the soaker was often made of a very thick, heavy-duty wool, and so that would have captured much of the liquid. Wool can be very absorbent, and the pilch was actually a wrapped garment, often made of animal skin, so maybe a type of leather. And so it may have even been worn as a layer of the diaper, the wool soaker, and then the pilch. And even then, so a lady or a father, a caretaker, still would have been prepared to lay a blanket or two or three over their lap when holding the infant, so that if there was an accident with wetness or soiling, their garments would have been, and of course the blankets would have been somewhat protected. Now, normally the leg coverings are referred to as drawers for boys and pantaloons for girls. I know a lot of people like to call that certain undergarment bloomers. And that's actually named for Amelia Bloomer. And she was a woman, a suffragette, very eager to see women get the right to vote. And she was also part of the dress reform movement that was going on, in the 1840s forward. And the garment that she was famously drawn and was often photographed and illustrated was based on a style called the Turkish trouser. And that was an exterior garment that the women would have worn. So it was not necessarily in reference to the undergarments. So for ease, I'm going to refer to them as drawers or pantaloons. And so the pattern that Castles gives to make these drawers, it's very interesting. It's almost geometric. And again, Elizabeth Stewart Clark has an amazing series of patterns for infants, toddlers, and children that are absolutely authentic. And if you really want to be historically accurate, definitely check out her line of patterns. I was trying to use what I already had because that's very much the pioneering spirit. So in thinking about what I had, it is this reproduction pattern from Simplicity. And the chemise and the little sack jacket and then the longer gown. This is very much the style that was shown at that time for the garment worn closest to the body after the diapers. So, you know, you have your undershirt or a chemise, and that could have been sleeveless or with sleeves, and it would very much, I imagine, been, what time of year was it? Was it a hot summer where they didn't have air conditioning, or was it a cold winter where they're reliant on the fireplace or open campfire? And then for the pantaloons and drawers, I actually used another simplicity pattern, these pants, because this is the historical drawing, and this felt very close to some of the other drawings that I found for patterns for that garment. And I had some muslin left over from previous projects for petticoats for myself, dress linings, even an old petticoat that had gotten very heavily soiled on the bottom, and I didn't want to wear it anymore. It would have been very much a pioneering thing to take that old petticoat and then to cut it down to other garments and remove the soiled section or removed the worn section and make something new. Because again, you know, as a whole, you were very careful with your clothing. Fabric was very, very expensive, and so you would have taken great pains. Fabric was very, very precious. And so in starting that, I am going to show you some of the processes that I went through to create the garments in the next few clips. And so that'll help you in what I found in Castle's household guide, how they gave the description to create these garments. And so this will help you to take a somewhat modern pattern and give it a historical touch. And then we'll come back here and go over what I created. So let's get started. And now I'm ready to begin cutting out my pattern pieces. Now on most pattern pieces, you will see the grain indicator line that you need to measure to make sure that it lines up. Since I am working with scrap pieces of fabric, the selvage is gone, and so in order to find where your grain is, an easy way to do that is just to make a small cut in the fabric, and then you can tear it, and it'll tear right along the grain. And then I'll just iron that flat, and that's a quick and easy way to find your fabric grain. And it doesn't work on all fabrics, so you want to make a little test piece first. This is actually the pattern piece for the little drawers that I'm going to make for my nephew Alder. And I have cut out the size medium for him, and that's based on his weight. Now, as I had mentioned earlier, I wanted this drawn thread work detail at the bottom of the pants, and then I also plan on making 2 growth tucks. So I'm not going to cut it at the medium level length because I want to add this extra fabric. So in determining where the cut line is, it would be a small if you line it up with the pattern piece. And then you have to think about, okay, I want to also then add 2 growth tucks. So if he is getting longer in the legs, the Victorians would incorporate a measure into their clothing to do so. So now I just need to measure how wide I want my growth tucks and incorporate that into where I am going to cut off the bottom portion of the pant leg so that it results in a level that will fit him. I wanted to show you how you can easily add growth tucks to your children's clothing, and you can do 1, 2, 3, however, which way you prefer. Now this is our fabric laid flat, and you can see the decorative edge. This is going to be the bottom of the leg on Alder's drawers, undergarments. And so what you do is you take the fabric and your seam gauge, and wherever you just measure where you want the tuck, and then take your hot iron and you're going to press over it all along the edge so that the growth tuck is even. So I'm going to head into the machine and do that real quick, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I just remeasured the leg piece against the original pattern, and it is a little bit shorter than the pattern piece. I'm actually okay with this. Given that these aren't pants, these are drawers, it's okay if they're a little bit shorter above the ankle. And again, if it's really too short, I have this growth tuck that I can bring down some length if need be. The pattern asked that you create a waistband casing for the elastic that measured 1.25 inches, and you can kind of see that I've done that. I first pressed the edge in 1/4 and then folded it down and pressed it another inch. And so if you put your buttonholes right there, once this casing is sewn, you'll be able to just slide your drawstring through. So again, go ahead and make your lines as to where you're folding the waistband down. And before you sew that closed, you're going to make a buttonhole on either side of the center seam. And I'll show you what we do after that. All right, so we have the waistband sewn in place. There's a little casing that our drawstring will go through, and here's our little buttonhole. So I'm going to do the safety pin trick where I put a small safety pin on one end, and then I have a big safety pin on the other, and that's just so I won't be able to accidentally pull it through. And voila, the drawstring is through. So now we just kind of need to even it up. And I'll probably end up trimming off some of the ends once I have Alder in front of me and I know how much room his little belly needs. The undershirt is pretty straightforward. I did opt to alter the pattern that instead of cutting out a medium length sleeve, I cut the shortest size because this is a garment to be worn in the summer. So my thinking was that would be a little bit cooler. I am getting ready to construct a child's petticoat, and you can see that I've made good use of the selvage. This is actually going to be, in essence, the hem. This would have saved fabric, number one, because fabric was very expensive, but it also would have saved time for the pioneer woman who had many, many things to do in her day to not have to then put in a hem. That would have been absolutely something she would have done. And then on the top edge, I folded it down by 1/4 inch and then came in about somewhere between 1/2 inch and 5/8 of an inch. So this is going to be my drawstring channel. And I've marked the center of this long rectangle of fabric because, again, I'm going to put a buttonhole on either side of that, but it will be right here. And that's where, or it can come in here if you want the drawstring to be inside the petticoat. But when dressing a child, I personally would opt to put the drawstring channel access entry point on the exterior of the petticoat. So I'm going to sew right along this edge after I put in the 2 buttonholes. I hope you found those previous segments helpful. One of the first things that I made was this infant chemise or undershirt, and it basically has 2 side seams, and it's finished with the bias cut fabric. You can kind of see that along here, and then it's closed with buttons on either shoulder to get over the infant's head. Now, one thing that I always try to do in my historical reproductions in clothing is to use one historical element. So on this little chemise, I had 2 gingham calico buttons. And it's not very often that you just need 2 buttons, and I just love calico buttons. They're one of my favorite things, and I thought it looked so sweet on this little chemise. And so, you know, and again, this could have been short sleeve or long sleeve. So this is a long sleeve version, and the arm was actually sewn as one piece to the bodice. Kind of see that. And then for this garment, I used antique mother of pearl buttons that button up the back of this little undershirt or chemise. The diagram that I was following in Castle's household guide actually had you use ties, and that could have been twill tape, cotton tape. Very much was used for many, many centuries as a closure. And I'm actually going to be using this on my nephew Alder. I'm traveling to Portland next month to photograph him for the book, and he will be, I think, 5 months old then. And I like to use buttons for garments that I'm constructing for babies, particularly if it's something that's going to be around their neck. I personally just think it's a safer option. And you know, the finishing of this neckline has a facing, and it's bound in more bias fabric that you can see there. And On all of these garments, I did either French seaming or a felled seam. And that was one thing that Castle stated, was that for infants, you wanted a very smooth seam. You didn't want anything rough against their skin because they are a bit more sensitive. And so the next thing is a petticoat that I was constructing. And you know, the beauty of petticoats is that you can do a waistband and button closure. You can do a waistband with hook and eye closure, but that somewhat limits you into how long you could use the petticoat. If you use the drawstring method, that of course allows the petticoat to be worn for a longer length of time. And I left this one without any growth tucks in it, but certainly I think a pioneering parent would definitely add growth tucks. So this could possibly be used for even a couple of years if growth tucks had been added. And of course, the drawers. And on the drawers, I did, for the historical element, I used repurposed pillowcase edging on the bottom of these drawers. I'll bring it in for a close-up. You can kind of see where I joined the two fabrics, and then this is a little growth tuck that I added so that it could extend the length. And the little pants, I used a flat filled seam, and that's what the interior seam looks like. This is created by, you just sew a regular seam and then one side you trim away, and then the other remaining flap is folded over and tacked down. I did this on machine. Some people prefer to do it by hand. It's just your preference. And of course, I opted to use another drawstring. And this size would probably be for about a 9-month to 1-year-old. I have to make a smaller pair for my nephew Alder, who isn't quite that big. But you know, again, all of these elements would have been worn by both boys and girls. And in terms of petticoats, you could possibly also have on a woolen petticoat over your cotton petticoat, or vice versa, or even a silk petticoat. Silk is actually the most insulating of all the natural fabrics. And if you lived in an extremely humid part of the country, you may even make it out of linen, because of course linen whisks away moisture beautifully. So, you know, you would have had cotton, linen, wool, or silk. And again, it's just the financial means of which would have been used and preferred by the family. And so I hope you have enjoyed the pioneering undergarments I've constructed. And again, everything will be linked down below to my website, which will have all of the resources and research links, so you can take a look at your leisure. And Next week I may be taking some time off. My daughter is moving home from Nashville to Texas, and she needs someone to drive the U-Haul, and Mom is it. And then I will be back with a wonderful field trip to the Homestead Heritage Site, and then the remainder of July will be a 4-week sew-along series, and this series is going to be perfect for both kids as well as those who are brand new to sewing. It's going to be a 9-patch quilt. So I hope you will come back, hit the subscribe button, and if you've enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. Thank you so much for visiting. It features the drawn work, and there's our grace. This week we're going to be